Welcome to the Boneyard with Steve Robertson. As always, I am your good friend and host, Steve Robertson. Hope things are well with you today. It's Monday, the last official week of the month of July. And you know what that means? Next week, football camp starts. We used to call it fall camp. It's not really fall camp. It's preseason camp. Because, it doesn't get fall around here to October. At least it doesn't feel like fall. And even then, it's a relative term. It seems like when we were kids, of course that's, decades ago for so many of us. But it seemed like, right around Labor Day, things kind of started calming down a little bit temperature-wise. And by the time you got into late September, there's a little wind and the leaves start falling. And now it feels like it's summertime all the way up to like November 1st. Feels that way. I don't know that I buy into all this climate change stuff. I don't. Be honest with you. But nevertheless, we're going to be out there at football practice. And we have the big, the cookout, the Summer Slam cookout deal. We'll do that Thursday evening on campus. So Wednesday, we'll give you a bit of a preview of that. But last big recruiting date of the off season. And we'll get into fall camp. And everybody gets into football mode. Everybody. High school players, high school coaches, college coaches. Sometimes we forget about that as we, I've made a career, covering recruiting for the most part, and really how I got my start in the industry. But at the end of the day, as great as recruiting is, and as fun as it is to follow, as my wife says, it's a soap opera for men. All of that said, it's part of a bigger picture, and that's football. And so today we're going to start our first SEC football preview of the year. It's like 40 days now. 40 days until football season's here. So we got to do 14 teams. I guess really 13 teams because we got Mississippi State in there. And but we'll start with that today. Got a very special top 10 list too. And it's from one of those bands that really only released one album. But it's very special to me. And as part of that segment, we're going to educate a lot of people, especially you young folks, because many of you have been sold a revisionist history about 90s music, early 90s rock music, and so I'm going to give you the true, definitive history of grunge today. If that didn't pique your interest a little bit, maybe perhaps it's you're a person that doesn't typically listen to the top 10 list, maybe you fast forward through that. We're going to give a little more time for that segment today. We're going to talk about one of the true pioneers of grunge music. But a lot to talk about for sure. A lot's happening in college athletics. You guys know there's new changes in the rules of college football. They're not going to stop the clock after first downs except in the final 2 minutes of a half. Not going to have these untimed downs and things like that. So, we keep making these changes, and I don't know if they're always for the betterment of the game, but, it's something we're going to deal with. And trust me, we'll be 2 weeks into the season, and then there's going to be Joe Blow on Twitter. Why did they stop the clock after the first down? We got screwed there. Well, that's the rule now. It's the rule we've all agreed to. And speaking of rules, there's about to be some new ones as it relates to NIL. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of people in my industry that have sold you their opinion that wasn't rooted in fact about NIL stuff. So we say I'm tired of talking about it, but there has been some developments. I'm going to update you on that today. But there are a lot of people out there that have kind of hitched their wagon to the wild, wild west that is name, image, and likeness. And there's about to be some changes with all of that, which is going to be interesting. My attitude's always been this. Like when it comes to our job, like we cover Mississippi State sports and other issues that relate to Mississippi State as a whole. But by and large, we're in the business of covering Bulldog sports. We don't need the sideshow. And sure, you've got an interest in it. We'll explain it. We'll spend some time covering it. But the thing that I've always felt, and it's like I used to always tell Gene, there'd always be these things that would pop up, and everybody's like, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, and you got to do this. And, we change companies, and there's all this craziness. And I said, Gene, we just got to play the rock and roll show, man. Just got to play the rock and roll show. Our job is to cover Mississippi State sports better than anybody else. And we do. And so there are a lot of people out there that want to prioritize the distractions. And that's not to say that NIL isn't a big part of things these days. It certainly is. But if this new legislation that's been proposed passes, and we expect it to, it's going to put some guardrails around a lot of that stuff. And so a lot of that noise is going to go away. A ton of it is going to go away. It's going to change the way that recruiting's handled as it relates to NIL. For 2 years now, it's just been an evolving system that hasn't had a lot of structure to it. That's about to change, which is going to be a really, really big deal for a lot of people that have kind of hitched their wagon to that and said, hey, this is the next revenue stream for us. People care about this. And what we're finding out is that people really don't. There's a lot of fatigue about NIL. And so I think with this federal legislation that is proposed, we're going to see that in many respects kind of fade into the background a little bit. I mean, how many times do you see it now? And we're going to have a baseball portal update too before the show is over, but it's like, so we'll be competing against LSU for a player in baseball. And so rather than it be about, hey, what's best for the player, who has the best situation, who did the best job recruiting them, making them feel like a priority, it's like, well, what's the NIL going to be like? How much is it going to cost us? That's not what we want in college athletics. We don't want players going to the highest bidder. I mean, goodness, that's the whole reason that we established a governing body in the first place, was to prevent that. And there are some baseball coaches out there right now, their opening pitch to kids is, well, tell us what's it going to take. How much money is it going to take? Not about, hey, here's our plan for you. Here's our path for your development. Here's what we think that you need to improve a little bit. Here's what we can do for. Forget all that. Hey, we're going to write you a check. That's not what we want in college sports. I think that my opinion is the collective opinion in that. We want people to pick schools for the right reasons. And so right now, in many respects, and I never thought we'd see it in college baseball, but after what LSU has done legally, a lot of people say, that's the way. And so then you think about those schools out there that are, maybe on the fringe of baseball. And what I mean by that is, Mississippi State, LSU, Ole Miss, Arkansas, to a certain extent, Florida State and others, we're very much committed to baseball. We can't fully fund it due to NCAA legislation, but we're very committed to baseball. So we have resources that are allocated for baseball that are very scary for other people. And then you think about, the Louisvilles of the world. Dan McDonald's done a great job there. Do you think that Louisville fans are going to fund a bunch of money? They don't even have to buy tickets there. I mean, it's free admission unless it's changed in recent years. And so they're not even paying to go to the games. You think they're going to fund an NIL fund to help procure players? It's not. And so where I see the damage in all of that, and nobody really talks about this, I've said this on the show before, the fact that Monmouth has the same level of voting power that Mississippi State or LSU does shows that something's wrong in the system. If we really want college baseball to grow, we've got to get our hands on this NIL thing. Because of the fact you already see LSU and Arkansas and Mississippi State, now Tennessee and others that are really, facilitating experiences that are really kind of unfound elsewhere in college baseball. Do you think Monmouth's ever going to vote to give us more for baseball? They're not. And then all of a sudden, we talk about like elections, and I don't want to get political with you guys, but it's not the partisans that establish who wins. It's the moderates. And so when you think about those programs in the middle of all this, because programs like Monmouth are against the expansion of college baseball, and then programs like LSU and Mississippi State are for the advancement of college baseball. And I think there are probably some people in that upper tier that really don't want to see everybody else fully fund and compete in baseball. But then there's all those teams in the middle. And so what happens is, I believe, with this NIL thing, it's like, man, the rich are getting richer. There's no way we can compete in baseball. So there's no point in us continuing to allocate additional resources for baseball because we're not going to be able to compete. And so all of a sudden, the middle of the road programs would just say, you know what, we're going to decide with Monmouth on this legislation. Because we're not going to do anything to give Mississippi State, Arkansas, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. We're not going to do anything to give them a greater advantage than they already have. So it's damaging to the game of college baseball. And it's not just baseball, but because of the fact that baseball is not a fully funded sport, I think that's what you're seeing, though. I think people are like, you know what? We were in the arms race. We were competing. We were trying to do all these things to upgrade our facilities. We're spending more money on coaches. And now on top of that, we got to go raise money to get players out of the portal. Guys, we're just going to be done with all this. So I think it's damaging. And again, nobody talks about that. You know, our friend John Cohen, last year on the D1 baseball committee, you know, but I don't envy that group moving forward, because how do you continue to grow the game when the price of expansion continues to escalate? It just doesn't. I mean, what we're seeing is the gap between the haves and the have-nots is getting expensive. It is almost too great a divide to connect. It really is. Let's thank our friends at Bulldog Burger Company. I love Bulldog Burger Company. I loved them before they loved me, but man, we love each other so much right now. I want you to go by and check them out. 3 great locations to serve you. University Drive here in Stark Vegas. And I don't know if you saw that, the blue burger. You know what I'm talking about? The one with the blue cheese crumbles on it, the black and blue. It's back. Limited time only, but it's back. So if you've been missing that one, or perhaps that used to be in your regular rotation of great restaurant quality hamburgers, you can go by there and get it again. And they're doing this great thing with the shakes too. There's like a shake for like a limited time only. They'll put this thing in, a new shake. Go by and check it out. Treat yourself to some amazing cuisine at Bulldog Burger Company. 3 great locations to serve you. University Drive in Star Vegas, Gloucester Street there in Tupelo, Lake Harbor Drive in the Ridge and Flowwood area. Go have a good time. Get the spring rolls as your appetizer. They'll make you and everybody around you better looking. Get that shake to go. Maybe it's not a chocolate shake. You know, maybe you're getting that lemon icebox pie shake, right? I mean, it's a new one all the time. And maybe ask them, hey, what's the shake you guys are pushing these days? You know, a couple years ago at Omaha, we had the banana shake. I mean, I said, hey, Bulldog Burger, we need to do this. And they did it for like a week. You know, it was great. Love those folks. I love places that I go that like, there's a consistency with the menu, but there's always something new, you know, something fresh that I can try. So as much as I love going there, I can always go there too, and there's going to be something new and exciting for me to sample. So go by and check them out. Bulldog Burger Company, the place where people go to meet, M-E-A-T. All right, let's talk some more about this NIL thing. So here is what we're looking at. So there is this bill. It's called the College Athletes Protection and Compensation Act. And the best thing about this, it's a bipartisan effort, which means it's likely going to pass. Maybe not in its current form, but we are going to get something done about NIL. This is long overdue. And again, this is an indictment on Mark Emmert and the NCAA for dragging their feet. But we have to have a national law to bring this thing into focus. Because of the fact, like right now, you've got other schools out there that are pushing their state legislators and saying, hey, we're not competitive enough in NIL. We need you to do this and you to do that. So what's going to continue to happen is you're going to have these state laws that are basically different in every state that provide a competitive advantage for some schools over others. That just can't happen. That flies in the face of all of this, right? The whole point's to have a level playing field. But what's interesting, there's a lot of people. You know, Tommy Tuberville, a Republican from Alabama, Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia. They're collaborating on another bill in addition to this. Ted Cruz, a Republican from Texas. Maria Cantwell, Democrat from Washington. All these people are involved. And so what happens is, you know as well as I do, there's so much of this. In order to get things done, you've got to have support on both sides of the aisle. This does. Now, the current bill, it's interesting, as Ross Dellinger notes, it's kind of a surprising trio. It's Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, Jerry Moran, Republican from Kansas, and Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey. Cory Booker, obviously a guy that a lot of people know well, but they're all working together to get this thing done. And what is so great about this is there's people involved here that are kind of anti-NCAA. And so there is maybe some personal parts of all of this. It's like we're going to use this to kind of maybe push the NCAA around just a little bit. But it's an amazing thing just because of the fact that we've got so many different ideas of what this thing should look like. I think this bill, I've read it, and again, I'm not a government official or anything. It makes sense to me as a person that covers and follows college athletics as closely as I do. It makes perfect sense to me. And there are some great benefits for student athletes in this, but also for the schools themselves. So if this act becomes a law, here are the things that it would kind of restrict and also kind of open up for student athletes. So again, there's some benefits in this thing that currently don't exist. And I think when we get to the end of this discussion, you're going to say, you know what, Steve, that makes a lot of sense. It does. All right, the first thing is it permits schools to restrict an athlete from entering a deal that is contrary to the school's code of conduct for moral reasons. That already exists in Mississippi. So like you can't have a student athlete go out there and promote gambling or pornography. I don't even think they can do alcohol. Maybe they can, but I think in Mississippi it's a little more restrictive. But in other places that's not the case. And as we're seeing, it seems like every day that just about every one of these new Twitter accounts that pops up's got an OnlyFans. And so a school would not want their student athletes being out there involved in something that is morally compromised and potentially exploitive. So it's going to allow schools to nix a deal. And there's some things in Mississippi that are already in existence that don't appear other parts of the country, like having to report the deal itself prior to the execution to compliance. Right now people are like, it's just kind of wild. Do what you want to do. That's not the case in Mississippi. It prohibits compensation to be used for inducements with the recruits and the retention of current players. The first part makes a lot of sense. The second part kind of made me raise an eyebrow a little bit, because that's kind of been our modus of operandi, right? Is like, we're not going to go out there and buy recruits, but we're going to do what we have to keep our players from being bought out from under us. In the event that you're able to eliminate these inducements for recruits, maybe you don't have to pay for the retention of players, right? There's a lot of guys that say, hey, I need some money, so I'm going to go tell coach I'm going to go in the portal, right? Oh, well, we can't do that, So there is a bit of maybe legalized extortion that's taking place there. But it would change the way collectives operate and probably take them back to how they were intended to operate, right? Because remember the bill of goods they sold us in the beginning. It's like, hey, you're going to have deals. You're going to have opportunities to get a deal. Listen, I did an NIL deal with Kellen Clark to promote Dogpile. That's what NIL was intended to be for. Use his name, image, and likeness to make himself some money and to provide some advertising for me. That's what the whole thing was supposed to be. It's not that anymore. How many times do you see everybody's like, oh, they got a big NIL deal. Where are the commercials? Where are the social media postings? Where are the personal appearances? Because that's what they told us in the beginning and say, yeah, this is a good thing. It is basically this bastardized version of what they offered us, and it's just not taking place the way it was intended. All right, another interesting dynamic here. Prohibit schools from representing athletes in NIL ventures or influencing an athlete's choice of representation. I don't know how much that's happening anyway, but I'm sure there are some schools out there that's like, oh, no, we got to take care of this donor. This guy is favorable to our program, so we need to make sure we're throwing business in their direction because, again, much of that money then comes back into, the benefits and the coffers for the program. But that's interesting. Allows schools to prohibit athletes in engaging in NIL ventures that are concurrent with college athletic events or competition. I don't know how big of an issue that is, but the fact that it is listed shows that somewhere it is. A lot of that could be any number of things. Basically, what you're trying to prevent here is you don't want to add anything else onto the to-do list of student athletes. In season, we want to be able to get this taken care of. In addition to that, too, you don't want a guy to have the big touchdown and then go on ESPN in postgame and hold up a Coke and say, hey, yeah, drink Coca-Cola. I'm going to go, now that this game's over, I'm going to go drink a Coke. You don't want that either. I don't think that's happened yet, but you certainly wouldn't want that, right? It'd be great for Coke, right? All of a sudden, Alabama and LSU play, and Jaden Daniels scores a game-winning touchdown, and the first thing he does is, whips out a Coke, or puts on a Reebok sweatsuit or something for his interview. We don't want that. We don't want. There's so many people already making money on college sports. Student athletes should be able to do it too, but we don't want to turn a press conference from an organic event into a advertising or marketing opportunity for other people. One of the things I think is super cool about this, because of the fact that I know so many student athletes, and I know many that when they finish up their college careers, they're a little bit banged up. And so one of these provisions now that is amazing is a couple things. If an underclassman goes in a draft, it allows them to retain their eligibility and return to school within 7 days of the draft ending, provided they don't receive compensation from a team or agent. That's big. Because, we talk about everybody in football especially. Guys decide that they're going to go into the draft and they don't get drafted, then there's nowhere for them to go. It's going to allow them the opportunity to return to school. The next thing is medical care. This may be, outside of the fact just providing us some structure and leveling the playing field for NIL compensation, this may be the most important part of this act. For schools that make $20 million in revenue or more, they provide medical expenses for 2 years. 2 years. After a student athlete is finished. 2 years. So like, you work a guy along and he has off-season surgery. What if he needs a follow-up surgery? As it stands today, that comes out of the student athlete and their family's pocket. If a school makes $50 million, then it's 4 years. That's pretty cool too. So they have a medical trust fund, according to Ross, that'll cover long-term injuries not covered by schools. Schools making at least $50 million have to contribute annually. I think this is a great thing. We should not have a student athlete that goes out there and spends their time, effort, and emotion to go out there and entertain us. That's what, at the end of the day, it's entertainment. And then not be able to live a normal life after that. A student athlete shouldn't have an injury that prohibits them from returning to a normal life after college athletics. I mean, there's sometimes, unfortunately, there are some major injuries that happen, but a person shouldn't graduate college being physically handicapped. It just shouldn't be the case. Not because they went out there and represented their university on the fields and courts of play. So that's a cool thing. That's a really cool thing to be able to do that. So this thing is rolling forward, and you may have noticed there was a statement issued on behalf of the Power 5 conferences that I think is interesting to talk about too. I think it's one of those deals where there are so many people out there that, again, nothing's going to happen. You really trust the federal government to fix this? Well, I do, because they want to fix it. This is not one of those deals too where you've got people on both sides of the both sides of the line that have a political agenda to be able to politicize this issue and make it more about their political party. This is what's best. This is good government at work here. And you say, well, Steve, I don't want the government involved in college athletics. Well, you missed that boat a long time ago. A long, long time ago. But again, the inaction of the NCAA and Mark Emmert, and that is his legacy. That is his legacy for you basically, lowering this to our doorstep and expecting our fans to be able to fund all this stuff. That's interesting. That's a very interesting aspect of all of this. But the cool thing is this thing's about to take place. But here's the statement. As members of the Autonomy 5 conferences, that's the Power 5, The ACC, Big Ten, Big 12, Pac-12, and SEC applaud Senators Blumenthal, Booker, and Moran for their thoughtful work on legislation to protect and benefit student athletes. Given the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, developing a federal standard that will preserve college athletics and serve as a uniform name, image, and likeness standard for athletes and institutions across the country is now essential. Yes, it is. We are pleased to see that momentum continues building in both the Senate and the House to address this issue. Our conferences welcome additional efforts in the future, and we look forward to engaging with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to continue making progress on bipartisan legislation in Congress. End quote. So you have the 5 most powerful conferences in all of college athletics working with both Democrats and Republicans to get this thing done quickly. And then we've got some other people out there that obviously have an agenda about NIL. Like, oh, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Yeah, well, you just had the commissioners of the 5 largest athletics conferences the game has ever seen come together and agree on this. What are the chances of that? I mean, think about this. The fact that you can get the SEC and the Pac-12 and all these other conferences to agree that this is a good thing, and you've got senators that don't like each other, that are putting their differences aside on both Republican and Democratic side, said, hey, there's a problem. We need to fix this. It just goes to show you this is going to happen. In some form or fashion, this is going to happen, much to the chagrin of many. But I think most of us, and I think the casual fan is like, Steve, I'm just so tired of this NIL thing. This is going to remove that from the front burner. So in many respects, while you'll still have the opportunity to have NIL compensation, it'll go back to more of how it was intended. It was never intended to be a recruiting inducement, ever. That wasn't the plan. And so now, if this bill passes as it's written, or somewhere close, we're going to go back to the spirit of the original conversation. It was never supposed to be a thing where all of a sudden we develop all these slush funds and we just start throwing money at players they don't have to do anything for. The whole thing is NIL compensation. Think about that for a second. On its face, it's compensation for your name, image, and likeness. Well, if you're not using your name, image, or likeness to promote something, what are you being compensated for? Well, Steve, they spend so much time and effort on the field. Well, that's what the scholarship is for. That's what the stipend is for. But now, we're just going to throw more money on top of it because the kid gets upset with his coach and threatens to go in the portal, and so let's go throw $5,000 at him so he doesn't leave and go to our rival school. Is that what we're doing? It was never intended to be this way. And so I'm encouraged, as you should be as well, because I'm just happy to kind of remove this as a topic of conversation, but also, too, basically give everybody a chance to kind of get back to how it should have been. And again, yes, it would have been wonderful. Will Rogers should have always been able to, hey, go make a deal with, the car dealership in his hometown and get paid to do an ad. Chris Jones and Dak Prescott and Jake Mangum should have been able to be compensated for people buying their jerseys. That's right. What's happening now is wrong. And thankfully, we're finally getting there. And I've talked about it for a year now. And I've even had people on my own website tell me, Steve, it's not going to happen. Guys, it's going to happen. You might as well go ahead and accept it. The fact that Cory Booker, who's one of the most polarizing members of Congress, is working with the Republican side, people that he argues tooth and nail with, and says, hey, we got to come together here and get this thing done. If that doesn't tell you it's going to get done, nothing will. They're going to do whatever they need to do to get this thing done. And that's going to be a big thing for college sports, and I think we're going to be able to kind of push away from a lot of this and kind of get back to normal. Like, there's so many people, I see it, I go out and speak, I talk to people, and like, Steve, this transfer portal stuff and the NIL stuff, it's just worn me out, man. I mean, it's like I can't even enjoy college athletics. My honest opinion is the portal is not really the issue. Even though there are some things that we can do with the portal to kind of make it a little bit better, and they are. They're going to shorten the windows. Like, that was the big thing last year. We needed to establish transfer windows. So, again, you didn't have a player get his feelings hurt in practice and just run to compliance and say, I want to transfer. Coach hurt my feelings. And so you couldn't coach them. right? You couldn't coach them. So now, so we put windows in place. Now we're going to shorten those windows because let's be honest. I mean, like right now, there's, the window has been open, right? And nobody was going in. I mean, we just wrapped up the transfer window for college baseball. Yeah, and we'd like to probably change that a little bit anyway. But the reality of it is what was due in 90 days, let's take it down to 45. You can't make a decision in 6 weeks that you want to transfer. You ain't got to pick a school. You just got to let us know. It shouldn't run, from May to the middle of July. It shouldn't. Give everybody 6 weeks. And not to mention, too, it elongates the recruiting process, too, for coaches. Because think about it right now. I mean, look at what you're dealing with right now. It's July 24th. Like, we're gonna start school here in a few weeks. And Chris Lemonis and his staff are still chasing players in a transfer portal. Still. So if we had moved this back, let's say the transfer portal deadline was June 15th, well, this would probably already be done. And so you think about, the workload for your coaches and your administrators, and all of a sudden we got to have an official visit. Let's turn the lights on in the stadium. Got to have a catered meal. That goes on and on and on and on and on. Not to mention, Lemonis and those guys are having to facilitate summer camps too, for the next guys that'll eventually go in the portal, right? But I think the portal again. I think there's some good things about the portal, but it's the NIL inducement attached to the portal. Like when schools are contacted by a third party and says, "Hey, I'm Ulysses Peters' uncle, and he wants to go in the portal. What will you give him if he does?" We want to eliminate all that. You absolutely want to eliminate that because then they're the 7-on-7 coach, and then there's guys in our state. There are people in our state that are basically working as de facto agents. They're not registered with the state. And we've been dealing with that all year this year. Got guys out here that are like trying to broker deals for these people. Well, you remove NIL compensation from recruiting, you eliminate those people. They'll go back to being bagmen, but basically you've legitimized a lot of that stuff with this NIL legislation. So we'll fix that. And when you've got people in this state that are out there traveling and trying to broker deals for young people to leave the state, that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. And somebody within our state needs to do something about that. But, of course, the federal legislation now in many respects will change that. So that's important to understand. There's a lot of layers to this, and all of them are good for Mississippi State, in my estimation. It's my opinion. Time for today's Top 10 list is always brought to you by closewithblair.com. Blair tells me again, man, you guys, the Boneyarders, are kind of loading up the pipeline, starting to close loans with great regularity. And I mentioned, too, we talked about this for about a week or so now. Again, really consider this. And I don't know who's the dominant parent. You say it's a partnership, but you and I both know. One of the parents says, hey, let's do this. And I was like, okay, if you think so, right? That's usually how it works, especially when it comes to making business decisions. Again, if you're sending your kid off to college, rather than throw your money away on an apartment, consider, buying a condo. Co-signing for your student, because they can do it at 18. When they're 4 or 5 years are up, you can sell it, recoup your investment, and establish some adult credit for your son or daughter. That's a really cool thing. Blair can tell you how it all works. I mean, it's a pretty easy concept to understand, but it's a new law. And Blair knows all the ins and outs about it. Top 1% close ratio in the country. This is the guy that gets things done. All we've done now is give Blair another weapon to work with, right? Give him a call or text today at 601-500-2344. Again, 601-500-2344. Reach out to him or go to closewithblair.com. Mention to him you heard about him on the Boneyard. I'm not saying you get special treatment, but you probably do, because Blair's one of us. I want to take care of everybody. But appreciate you guys giving Blair the opportunity to serve you. It's a guy that's been in the industry 22 years. 22. Pretty impressive. Nobody stays in any industry 20-plus years by accident. You got to get things done. You got to be a producer. That's what Blair is. Again, closewithblair.com. All right. Today's Top 10 is very special to me. Should have done this last week, but maybe I wasn't ready last week. And you guys, I've written the new book, When the Bottom Falls. You can pre-order at whenthebottomfalls.com. I'm done writing. We'll finish up final edits this week. We'll push that thing out to print. We'll have your book here in September. How about that? How cool is that? It's incredible that we can go from my desktop to a print to the store. But you can pre-order, and many of you, of course, live out of state. This thing isn't going to be available through Amazon. I got a whole deal to tell you about Amazon. I don't sell books through Amazon. Other people do, but I want to protect our local vendors and our independent bookstores in Mississippi. And so after Flim Flam, I had a discussion. I won't tell you who because I won't embarrass them. But because I give them credit for saying something to me because I didn't think about it, right? And the bottom line is this, Flim Flam had a lot of national appeal, and we sold thousands of books through Amazon. Thousands. And some weeks, the publisher was having to ship books daily to Amazon. And as soon as they get them, they'd sell out. Because there was a lot of people that didn't frequent bookstores in Mississippi, so it was a vehicle for us to sell a lot of books, and we did. And to date, Flim Flam is still the best-selling book I had. Dogpile's close, and I'm probably hurting myself financially by not using Amazon. But the way that I looked at it is, again, that they had a vendor that we have had a great relationship with. And I think he probably regrets saying it, but I'm glad he did. One day, I'm at a book signing, and a guy walks in, and he goes, "Hey, I didn't buy the book here. I bought it on Amazon. Will you sign it for me?" Well, the whole point, really, I'll sign every book if people show up, right? But I want you to buy a book from them. And if you've already, if you came to buy Dogpile and you brought Flim Flam with you or Stark Villains, I'm happy to sign that for you too. But the whole point of me doing the book signing is not just for me to sell books, but for you to go into their store, right? That's the whole point of them hosting me. To sell books, but to sell other merchandise. And this guy just showed up one day, and that's all he did. He goes, "Hey, can you sign my book? I bought it on Amazon." And as the guy left, the gentleman turned to me, and he goes, "That Amazon stuff is killing us." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, we've been here with you all along. And we just had a guy buy a book online and come to our store to have you sign it. We don't profit from that. Not to mention they lowered the price so much that, people are just going to buy it from Amazon rather than buy it from us because they can buy it from us at full retail or buy it for them at a discount." And there was one time when Flim Flam was really hot, and sometimes they were selling it for $19.99. I think I've seen it as low as $17.99 at times. I know somebody last week bought it for $47, which I have no clue why you do that. Somebody's like, "Yeah, I bought this book. It was $47.99. You can go on our website and buy it for $25 right now," right? I don't know why you'd ever do that, but thank you. Amazon will pocket all that money. I won't make any more money off that just because you paid more. But so after Flim Flam, I said, we're not going to do it anymore. We're not going to do Amazon anymore. And we have it. Now, there, like Stark Villains, there was a bookstore on the coast that, they saw an opportunity and said, "Hey, if Steve's not going to do Amazon, we will." And they set up the Stark Villains bookstore or whatever. That was not affiliated with me. They just bought our books and sold them online. And congratulations to them for showing some innovation, right? That's their decision. That wasn't through Amazon itself. That was through a storefront set up by Mississippi Bookstore. I support that. But we're not doing Amazon. And that's why. Because a lot of people have asked me, "Steve, why not?" Well, it's because these people here, the great bookstores in Mississippi, have been with me from the beginning. Why would I want to hinder their ability to do business? Yes, it would be more convenient for many of you to go to Amazon. I'm on Amazon all the time, but I'm buying things I can't get locally, right? And so I share that with you just because I'm a big proponent of buying and shopping local, eating local, staying local, no matter if I'm in Starkville or not. No matter where I travel, I try to always support small business. And even though I use Amazon, I do, but I buy things that I can't buy locally. Like today, I bought a shirt, a Mother Love Bone shirt. And that's the subject of your top 10. We're going to have a very, very educational day today. But again, if you're looking for the new book, whenthebottomfalls.com, you can get everything there. When the Bottom Falls, if you have been impacted by addiction, if someone you love has been impacted by addiction or alcoholism, or if you know somebody that you work with or go to church with or whatever, I'm going to encourage you to buy the book. This is not a vanity project. This is about my path to addiction and to recovery. And I wrote this in hopes of helping other people. And it's the longest book I've ever written. Longer than Dogpile. There's a lot in there, and I could have packed even more. And my wife even told me afterwards. She goes, you could probably do a sequel, and we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But the reality of it is I did my best to put everything that I know about addiction and recovery in that book. And so again, I'm encouraging you to buy that. WhenTheBottomFalls.com. But back to Mother Love Bone. This album came out on July 19th, 1990. And so nobody knew. When Apple, the debut album from Mother Love Bone came out, it just wasn't a big deal. They had an EP before they came out, a 5-song EP called Shine. And let me back up just a little bit here. All right, so I want to make sure you understand this, because it seems like every kid that I know these days has bought them a Nirvana shirt at Walmart or at Spencer's Gifts or whatever. I'm going to give you guys a history lesson because there's so many people. Listen, I was absolutely obsessed with grunge. Absolutely obsessed. Even though that I hate what the record companies did. They abandoned bands like Warrant and Janie Lane and Rat and people like that had made them millions, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, and say, well, let's do something different. And really it's MTV in many respects. There's kind of some collusion there, so we need something different. And here's the thing about that. There are so many people, you say, well, Steve, why do you hate Nirvana so much? Well, part of it's because of the fact that they are falsely attributed for so much. To suggest that Nirvana started grunge would be like saying Poison started heavy metal. And that's not in any way to be disrespectful to Nirvana or to Poison. They didn't ask for that. Black Sabbath already had, a huge following before heavy metal really took over in America. And so, yes, Poison was ultra successful. Bret Michaels recently played at Philadelphia and had a capacity crowd. People had a great time. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. But we don't have to go back and have this revisionist history and try to suggest that Bret Michaels was Ozzy. He wasn't. And that's okay. It's the same thing with this Nirvana thing. It's like, well, Kurt Cobain invented grunge. No, he didn't. He absolutely did not. But Steve, no, but you don't know what you're talking about. And so I'm going to give you a history lesson today about, as a matter of fact, Kurt Cobain, the very first show, the very first real concert he went to, even though, again, and I'm going to tell you this too, and you're going to think it's disrespectful, but you can take it up with Kirst Novoselic. Kurt Cobain was a liar too. He lied about so much about his past. He was a very, very troubled person, as you know, even as a young person. The very first concert that Kurt Cobain went to, Sammy Hagar. Okay, so put that in your pipe and smoke it. All right, so let's get to this, okay, about Mother Love Bone. A little bit of history here. So in 1980, the Seattle sound really began to change. You had the Melvins, you had the U-Men, you had Skinyard, and you had Malfunction. Those bands really were doing something different. Melvins was credited with being the first band to really do drop D tuning. They weren't the only ones, but they were kind of the first ones to kind of make that their signature sound. And so when you think about drop D tuning, which was very prevalent in the grunge era, you can credit the Melvins for that. Because everybody heard them, were like, dude, where's that tone coming from? What are they doing? Well, they've tuned down. And so it had this darker, more ominous feel to it. Because so much of like the 80s is like, all I think about is like Ernie Ball super slinkies on a pink Ibanez with a monkey grip, right? It was so different from that because everything that happened in the 80s was very up and operatic. And, before grunge hit, probably the most successful band at the time playing 80s style music was Queensryche from Seattle. Like they were known as kind of the kings of Seattle. And then this begins to happen. And you listen to Queensryche, there's actually some elements of grunge in Queensryche. You say, but Steve, no, because Queensryche wasn't a hair metal band at all. But you go back and listen to some of the things that Michael Wilton and Chris DeGarmo were doing guitar-wise. You hear that in Mike McCready. You do. Mike McCready is one of the best metal guitar players of this generation that doesn't play metal. He actually played on Ozzy Osbourne's album, this Patient Number 9. Mike McCready is a huge metal guy. Alice in Chains, before Jerry Cantrell really kind of took over leadership of the bands, Alice in Chains was an 80s hair band. But Steve, no, but you don't know what you're talking about. You go look it up for yourself. You can see Lane Staley with teased up hair and his little denim jacket. You know, so much of this stuff with the grunge thing was an image. People were just trying to make money. Music was changing. But Malfunction was a band that in 1980 they were founded. Andrew Wood was the singer. And in 2011, Stone Gossard, and God bless Stone Gossard, he takes all these Malfunction demos and releases them as an album. So you got a chance to go listen to that. It's pretty cool. And remember, it is demo form, right? I mean, most of it's a 4-track or an 8-track type recording, so it's not like the big room studio stuff. But you can kind of hear the genesis of what became with Love Bone. But here are some bands. Like, guys, Nirvana was founded in 87. Okay, and that's not, they didn't get a record deal in 87. They were founded. They were playing garage and local bars. They were playing Tuesday nights at bars in Seattle. They weren't even headliners on a weekend. It took probably a year before they began to headline clubs. But here are some bands that were already playing and already had record deals. Screaming Trees in 84. U-Man 1980. Soundgarden 1984. Skinyard 1983. The Melvins 1983. Green River 1984. Of course, if you know your Pearl Jam history, you know before Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard were in Mother Love Bone, they were in Green River, then Mother Love Bone, and then Pearl Jam. The best band from the 90s. But Mother Love Bone was really the first one that was expected to have the big deal. A lot of these bands were kind of like postmodern punk, but Mother Love Bone was different, because you took the best elements of Green River and combined them with the best elements of Malfunction. And that became the album Apple. Originally, they released the 5-song EP Shine, and in 92, they released the Mother Love Bone, I guess you'd call it a compilation album. It was basically Shine and Apple together, 17 songs, and that came out in 92. And so that was, listen, that was a very important time in my life. 91, as you guys know, was very, very difficult for me. But 92, I met Dana July 10th of 92. Our first date was August 10th of 92. We got engaged October 7th of 92 and married May 15th of 93. So she went from being a complete stranger to being on my joint checking account in less than a year's time. But 92 was an important year for me. And so I was, again, absorbing everything that I could possibly find, grunge, because I liked it. I did. And you look back at it in hindsight and you say, well, it only lasted about 15 minutes, and which is true, because here's the deal. Like, I make the whole thing about Bret Michaels to Ozzy, Kurt Cobain, to Malfunction and the U-Men and people like that. This genre already existed. Heavy metal already existed. But guys like Bret Michaels kind of took it mainstream. Because even with bands like Motley and Rat, it was still kind of niche. Like, we liked the fact that our parents didn't like it. But Bret Michaels, the Pretty Boys and Poison, all of a sudden it was a lot easier to watch those guys. They weren't in, leather jackets and looking like they'd stepped out of a biker bar. And so it was a little more commercially acceptable. And that's what happened with Nirvana. You had this movement that had been well established in the Pacific Northwest that was beginning to kind of matriculate across the country, mainly down the West Coast. And then Soundgarden broke. And the key part of the Soundgarden thing is Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses loved Chris Cornell, loved him. And so they take Soundgarden out. So now all of a sudden Soundgarden really gets the big break for grunge. Soundgarden went from being a regional act to being a national act because of 80s metal. Because they go out on the Use Your Illusion tour in support of Guns N' Roses. And then Soundgarden, of course, because they're going out with Guns N' Roses, all of a sudden Headbangers Ball and MTV starts playing Soundgarden. You know, the Loud Love album comes out. Ultra Mega OK was kind of an afterthought at that point. It really wasn't in record stores. But when Loud Love comes out, all of a sudden people are like, oh, this Hands All Over guy, Chris Cornell, this guy can really sing, right? So we knew something different was happening. And so I say that to kind of, let's correct the narrative and support it with the actual facts, rather than what's become now accepted as fact that is not factual at all. Again, all due respect to Nirvana, I didn't like them. I didn't get it. Even now in hindsight, I think so much of that was completely disjointed. And they were kind of propped up in many respects as a corporate creation, and if that hurts your feelings, then too bad. That's exactly what they were. You go back and, but Steve, no, that stuff with Sub Pop, yeah, exactly. That's what they really intended to be. And then you got this homogenized kind of polished thing in Nevermind. Then you go back and listen to In Utero, which was an album that was nearly shelved, but the record company was upside down in it, and Kurt had become so combative in recording sessions, they used 3 or 4 different producers to finally get In Utero complete just to get it to market. And then, of course, the ride ended. And so, again, you can't discount the fact that Nirvana helped take it mainstream. But to suggest they were the innovators of grunge, that is absolutely false. Period. Mother Love Bone and Andrew Wood, the rightful fathers of grunge music. And we just had the one album. And sadly, days before it was planned to be released, Andrew Wood died of a heroin overdose. You may not know this either. Andrew Wood was born in Columbus, Mississippi. How do we know that? The Golden Triangle, right? Kind of the cradle of grunge music? You kidding me? Yeah, that's right. Even with grunge, Mississippi is part of the story. It's amazing to think about, right? How this is the birthplace of America's music, as we say. And it is. Even grunge. How about that? You didn't expect to learn that today, but you did. But Andrew Wood had been a heroin addict. He really got involved in drugs in the mid-'80s and was back and forth. And then he was trying to kick it. He went to rehab after they finished the album. He said, because he was one of these kind of people that didn't think that he could write or create without narcotics, and told his mom he needed to go to rehab to get clean. He got out, he was clean, and then he relapsed and was found comatose and lived for 2 days on life support and ultimately died. And so that album just kind of withered away, that Apple album in 1990. So again, you had the Shine EP and then Apple, and you're like, well, that's it. It goes out of print. It's completely dormant. It's in nobody's store. It's not a big deal at all. And then all of a sudden, Soundgarden explodes. Chris Cornell and Andrew Wood were roommates and best friends. Matter of fact, if you can find it on YouTube. There is one song of Andrew Wood and Chris Cornell singing together in their apartment. It's a song called Island of Summer. And you can hear them harmonize. It's amazing. But again, it's just 2 guys sitting around playing guitar and recording on like a 4-track. It's not polished in any way, but it's the only recording of the 2 of them singing together. And you can find it again on YouTube. It's in that documentary too, Malfunction, the Andrew Wood story, if you want to watch that. But as Soundgarden and Pearl Jam began to explode, there was so much interest in Seattle. There were a lot of people involved in the Seattle scene that were like, hey, you know, this all started with Andrew and Mother Love Bone. And so they re-release Apple as this compilation album with Shine. And so we're going to pick today, and it's difficult to do. There's 17 songs, and this is one of those holy grail albums. In many respects, it's kind of the Six Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks, Here Comes the Sex Pistols. It's kind of like that of grunge. It is one of those albums that in many respects is kind of the holy grail of grunge music. So if you appreciate grunge and you love grunge and you like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and bands like that, and you don't know Mother Love Bone, you owe it to yourself to go back and listen. So there's your history lesson. But here are my top 10 Mother Love Bone songs. Now, Dana, I used to call her Miss Rose Bowl. I try not to do that. I got some friends that call her that. I'm going to ask people not to do that. Don't call her Miss Rose Bowl. I'm Rose Bowl. I don't mind being called Rose Bowl. But she has her own identity, and she is not just my wife. She's Dana. So when you see her, and you'll see her at some book signings this year, please don't call her Miss Rose Bowl. Call her Dana. Because she's my baby, but she's Dana. But she'll disagree. I didn't put one of her favorites on this list because it's my list. I mean, if she wants to start her own show, she can, and build her own following. That's fine. She loves the song Bone China. I didn't put it on here. I love it too. But I got 17 songs to pick from, so there's going to be something deserving that's not on the list. All right, number 10 for me, and this is the one song that's from the demo Shine that maybe didn't get the notoriety that some of the others did, because again, they're all part. It didn't make Apple, but it did make the compilation album. It's a song called Mindshaker Meltdown. I absolutely love this thing. I would love to have heard this like ultra produced, right? You know what I mean? Like if they could really fine tune it a little bit. But I think the raw nature of the guitar tone is one of the things that really stands out. Number 9, from Apple, it's Hard Shine. Love this one, and love the vocal on it, and you can kind of hear Andrew's passion in this song. Number 8, and I've told people I want this played at my funeral, it's a Man of Golden Words. It's a ballad, it's a piano in the background, and there's a lyric in there that ultimately proved to be ultra important, where he says, it feels like I've been living in the temple of the dog. Well, of course, I get chills even saying that, because, temple of the dog, of course, Chris Cornell had written Say Hello to Evan and Reach Down. They put together this album with Stone and Jeff and the guys from Pearl Jam, Matt Cameron, and the Temple of the Dog album, which was remastered a couple years ago and then re-released. But that's where they get that from. Temple of the Dog is from the song Man of Golden Words. And that's also interesting, too. A little flim-flam note for you. We talked about that earlier in the show. There is a Temple of the Dog song. The title of that is one of my chapters in that book. It's Pushing Forward Back. And again, this goes back to Andrew Wood and Chris Cornell and all of that. And so I just thought it was apropos. Nobody ever said, hey, Steve, you named the chapter after Temple of the Dog song. It's kind of an inside, trivia fact with myself. Now you know, too. Number 7, a song called Captain High Top, The Love Commander. The last rock band that I was in, we covered this song. I love it. I love the energy in it. We put it together, and you think there's all these great songs in this catalog, and on this album, that's the one you go with. I just loved it. I thought, number 1, I thought we could play it and I could sing it, so we did it. But Captain High Top is number 7. Number 6, the lead track on Apple. This is Shangri-La. Love it, and again, it's one of those things, too, that just kind of punches you right in your face. There's not as much attitude in the guitar playing with grunge. It's a little different, and a lot of people, it is some very angry music, but this is like before. And honestly, I think a lot of the subject matter that kind of leaked into Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, a lot of that was because of Andrew Wood's death. I think he was such an amazing person and talent that his death kind of changed the direction of the Seattle scene. And I can't always say it's a positive thing, but I think it's a big, big part of things. I mean, Chris Cornell himself mentioned that he had bouts of depression for years because of Andrew Wood's death, about how unfair it all was. Number 5, Capricorn Sister. Absolutely love this one. You probably have heard this one and didn't know that what the name of the song was or who sang it, because it seems like in every early 90s movie, they worked in some Mother Love Bone, and Capricorn Sister was one of those songs. The guitar on it is super, super cool. Number 4, I love this one. Absolutely love it. My favorite part of this song is the breakdown. It's Holy Roller, number 4. What's interesting, too, is kind of the genesis of this song. And for those of you that will go to the trouble of pulling up the Malfunction demos, there's a track on there called Shotgun Wedding. And some of the lyrics from Shotgun Wedding make their way into Holy Roller, in the Love Bone Breakdown. They're playing the guitar part, and he goes to Love Bone Breakdown. And he's like, he talks about love rock awaits you, and, the boys in Mother Love Bone know what to do for you. They're like soup. They're like nothing bad, I'll tell you that much. And you know what? I think I'm telling you the wrong story here. That Shotgun Wedding thing is actually part of Man of Golden Words. My mistake. But there are some elements of that in the Holy Roller thing. But some of the lyrical content from Man of Golden Words is in Shotgun Wedding. It fits in Man of Golden Words better. But there is some of that, too, in Holy Roller. My mistake. Here I am trying to pass myself off as the expert, and I make a mistake like that. My mistake. I think I think most of us would agree that the top 3 are probably correct. We may disagree on the order, Number 3 is Stargazer. And I love this one. When I first heard it, it always reminded me of Dana. And, I told this to Roy earlier. The day before payday, like when the Mother Love Bone VHS came out, it came out on a Tuesday, and we were getting paid that Friday. And so our last $20, the Thursday before payday, we went and bought the Mother Love Bone VHS. I still have it. I don't have a VCR player that I use. I've got one around here somewhere, but I still have that VHS. I mean, it's a relic of our past. It's memorabilia of things that mean something to us. But Stargazer, number 3. Number 2, probably Dana's favorite Mother Love Bone song. It's Crown of Thorns. And number 1, it's Stardog Champion, the one that started it all. They made a video for it. They released it. Of course, that was all in support of the album. And give Chris Cornell, the guys from Pearl Jam, a lot of credit for reintroducing a generation to Andrew Wood. Again, really the innovator of grunge. I think in many respects, I think those people that really truly followed the scene would say that Andrew Wood is probably the father of grunge music. Not Alice in Chains, not Nirvana, not Screaming Trees or Mudhoney, even though those bands were all very influential. It really goes back to Andrew Wood. Things were changing. And what a dynamic personality. And what a shame that we lost him when we did. But let's celebrate some Andrew Wood today. And of course, the album was released July 19th, 1990. It was delayed because days leading up to its release, Andrew died. So they pushed back the release. And of course, the band disbanded because without Andrew, there was no Mother Love Bone. And that ultimately, Stone and Jeff stuck it out and found a singer from San Diego, California by the name of Eddie Vedder, and Pearl Jam became the band of the 1990s. Still performing, still selling out arenas. And again, I just thought today would be a good day to kind of correct so much of this. There's so many young people today. Like I've got a young kid in my life that has a Nirvana shirt, and I would never be a proponent of that, but he's free to wear what he wants to wear. But there are a lot of people, again, they want to argue with me about this, and it's okay to love them. It's okay to say, you know what, hey, I love Nirvana, that's cool, but it is not correct to say that they were the founders of grunge music. They weren't the innovators of grunge music. They were basically the product of a record company trying to cash in on a movement that was already well underway for nearly a decade. But it wasn't until Soundgarden, Pearl Jam. Goodness, I mean, Soundgarden had sold 2 million records before Nirvana had a record deal. It's important to understand that. So again, people say, Steve, you always hate on Nirvana. I don't really hate on Nirvana, even though I didn't like them. I hate on the fact that we have this revisionist history. And if you do some research about Kurt Cobain, and there's some interviews out there with Kurt Novoselic, and he talks about how Kurt had basically a BS degree in revisionist history. Like he would tell people all sorts of things about himself that were just false. I mean, I guess because maybe the truth was too painful. He was a guy that was very tortured, and parents divorced at a young age, and after that he became a very rebellious young man, and that continued, for much of his life. And so, rest in peace, Kurt. No hard feelings by any stretch of the imagination. But the reality of it is that grunge was a movement that didn't last. I mean, nowadays nobody plays grunge music anymore. They don't. And outside of Pearl Jam, you don't see people out there doing big shows anymore from the grunge era. You just don't. It's amazing. Motley Crue and Def Leppard and those guys are out selling out arenas all over the world. And grunge, in many respects, was, I guess, in some respects, kind of force-fed down our throats to kill the 80s metal scene that had become very, very homogenized. It was very cookie cutter at that point. You had a lot of bands that were basically ripping off other bands. There wasn't a lot of new stuff. It was very creative. And so, the music industry was ripe for something new. They gave us grunge, and then you had the post-grunge world, and things got really weird then. You had a lot of bands that really didn't have much talent, but they were getting kind of pushed, and in many respects, it didn't hold up. There's some people today that'll tell you, oh, I love this band. I love them, my favorite band. And then them and like 20,000 people buy their records. I mean, it's not what it once was. And like today, the sound is so overprocessed and kind of industrial rock based. there's so much of the music you hear today. You hear a lot of elements of Nine Inch Nails and Ministry and things like that. We basically have blended so much. It's become genre bending. Be careful how I say that. Genre bending type music, where there are things nowadays that are just completely different. So an elongated top 10 list today because I wanted to give you a bit of a history lesson. We thanks to Blair and everybody else for their ideas for the top 10. Got a big one coming up on Wednesday. We were going to run that one today, and I decided to do Mother Love Bone instead. But we got a big one coming up on Wednesday with another interesting history lesson about American music that we'll talk about. Our next segment of the show is always brought to you by Campus Bookmart. Campus Bookmart, a Starkvillian institution. I love Campus Bookmart. You should too. If you're looking for Mississippi State merchandise, look no further than Campus Bookmart. The bottom line is this. Everybody out there says we got the best selection of Mississippi State merch. They don't. They don't. Campus Bookmart, the mother love bone of Mississippi State merchandising outfits. For sure. There are a lot of people that are pretenders to the throne. But Miss Kathy Brown and the fine folks at Campus Bookmart, they are the originators and innovators when it comes to Mississippi State merchandising. If you can't make it to town, visit them on the World Wide Web at campusbookmart.net. And by being a loyal Boneyard listener, we'll give you a phrase that pays. That's BSR, which stands for Beautiful Steve Robertson. That gets you free shipping on all orders over $75. Any order less than $75, absolutely incomplete. All right, we'll begin our SEC previews with the University of Alabama. And we're going to play them again, and then we won't play them next year. How cool is that? How cool is that? I'm excited about that. Very excited about that. It's going to be kind of interesting to not have to play those guys. But Alabama going to be elite on defense this year. You start thinking, well, Steve, they lost this and they lost that. And they lost Will Anderson. They did. They did lose Will Anderson. But Alabama, we talk about all the time, they don't rebuild, they reload. Nick Saban's got that thing running like a soul machine over there. But Alabama finished number 2 in the West last year, as you guys are well aware. Big game, big win down there for LSU in Tiger Stadium as they beat Alabama. And again, the Alabama team last year was great. But they weren't one of those teams you looked at and say, you know what, they're elite. There were some games last year, and we go back and we think about all that stuff, that in hindsight, Bryce Young won some games for them last year basically on his own, and I hate to underscore to undersell the accomplishments of other people, but the reality of it is there were a couple of games last year, and you and I both know that if Bryce Young didn't go make some plays on his own, Alabama loses. That's just kind of how it all went, And let's take a quick, kind of glance back at how things went for the Tide last year. And, kind of got off to a good enough start. They blast Utah State. They sneak by Texas 20-19, and that's one of those games we're talking about. If you remember, Bryce Young basically willed that team to a victory late and set up a game-winning field goal. And they win 20-19. But you kind of got a feeling then this Alabama team may not be what we thought, but you say, you know what? Great teams win when they don't play well. And Alabama finds a way to escape Austin, Texas with a W. They then blast Louisiana Monroe 63-7, and then they get Vanderbilt 55-3. So 55 or more points in 3 of the first 4 games. They go to Arkansas. It's a tussle for a little while, then Arkansas does what Arkansas does against Bama. They end up kind of giving it up late, but it got away from them 49-26. A&M beats them in 21, nearly goes to Tuscaloosa and beats them again. And again, this is Bryce Young kind of being Bryce Young. The next weekend, what appeared to be a vulnerable Alabama team took on a red-hot Tennessee team, and give Hendon Hooker a lot of credit, man. You talk about Bryce Young willing Alabama to wins. Tennessee doesn't win this game without Hooker. And there was a time we thought he was injured and not going to be able to do it, and he orchestrates this amazing drive. They win 52-49. Then we go over there and we play them, and even though we got beat 30-6 and we scored a touchdown in the final game, did you ever feel like we were just getting dominated? Well, Steve, we're down 30 points. We were. But it never really felt like they just manhandled us. They beat us on some scramble plays. They beat us in some man-to-man coverage. But you just kind of got the sense they were a little bit vulnerable. The next week, they go to LSU and they lose 32-31. So really 4 games in a row where Alabama was not as impressive as they ordinarily were. And, of course, listen, we had no chance to win that game. I'm not trying to sit here and say we should have. But my point being is that things just weren't what they expected them to be. Fresh off that loss they had to Oxford, a lot of people thought Ole Miss would get them. They didn't, and it went down to the final play of the game. Ole Miss just couldn't complete the comeback. They had a chance there at the end. Didn't work out. They get Austin Peay 34-0 the next week. Then they get by Auburn 49-27. I remember thinking, too, the way Auburn was playing at the time, we're like, I can't pick Auburn to win this game, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't make a game of it. They don't. Alabama wins 49-27. And then you get the Sugar Bowl against Big 12 champion Kansas State. And you want to talk about the difference between the conferences. This is a good illustration here. Kansas State, obviously a very good team last year. Alabama all over them 45-20. So they end the year with 11-2 record. They don't go to Atlanta. But, in what we've seen in years past, when Alabama misses a playoff, sometimes they don't show up for the bowl game. Well, they did. An impressive win over Kansas State. And, again, good job by that coaching staff. What's interesting, too, when I begin to think about this year, Tommy Rees, his offensive coordinator, makes a move over from Notre Dame. So he's a first-year offensive coordinator. Did you realize that 5 of 7 teams in the SEC West have a brand-new offensive coordinator? You wouldn't know that because the SEC media is beating up Mississippi State. Well, things are going to change, because they don't now run in the air raid. I mean, the same air raid that they criticized for 3 consecutive years. Now we bring in Kevin Barbay to bring more balance and run some air raid passing concepts. Like, well, it's just too much change for State. Well, but 5 of 7 teams in the SEC West have a new offensive coordinator, including Alabama. And you can start running through the thing, too. Like, Alabama's got a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. Auburn, probably going to have a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. Arkansas will have KJ and a new offensive coordinator. Texas A&M, they're going to have a new coordinator and a relatively inexperienced quarterback too, with Wegman, who played a little bit for him last year. So why is it only Mississippi State that gets criticized for that? When 5 of 7 teams in the West have a brand new offensive coordinator and essentially a brand new offensive system, why is it just us? All right, the 2023 schedule for Alabama: Middle Tennessee, and then they host Texas. They're at South Florida. They host Ole Miss. They come to Starkville, and then they head to College Station. And you start looking where we're positioned there, and you start thinking, hey, home game, road game, and then you got to go to College Station. Is A&M going to be any good? I think so. But A&M has kind of been in Alabama's heads the last 2 years, and won in 21, and arguably should have won last year. And so you start asking yourself, it's Alabama, they're a machine. Maybe they come in here a little flat. We'll see. After A&M, they host Arkansas, host Tennessee, host LSU. That's a very, very big streak of games right there. That whole month of October, going to be big. The bye week after Tennessee, so they'll have the bye week before LSU, and then it's at Kentucky, and then they host Chattanooga the week before the Iron Bowl. So you start running through the schedule here, and you say, you know what? Alabama's got a good chance to run the table. Then you start thinking, can a first-year starter do that at quarterback? That's a lot to ask, no matter how talented they are. And, yes, they've got a tremendous supporting cast around them. Brand new offensive coordinator, brand new starting quarterback. Are they going to be in the playoff? I think they will be, but I think it's right to maybe question that a little bit. I think maybe you look at it and say, you know what? I don't know. Texas showed them last year they could play with them. And again, I think if you had a first-year quarterback last year against Texas, you lose that game. Ole Miss in Tuscaloosa. Listen, Ole Miss has given Alabama some trouble at times. Maybe not so much as they did with Freeze, but last year's game, again, goes down to one play. And so That could be an interesting game. I think in the end, if you're Alabama this year, you're very run heavy, right? I mean, that's what you're doing. You're looking to be run heavy. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be strong against a run. I think it also takes some pressure off quarterback. Maybe it's Ty Simpson. Maybe that's who wins. But people talk so much about the freeze wins in 14 and 15. Ole Miss hadn't won since then. Last year was the closest they came to winning against Alabama since 16. Here are the scores: 48-43. I guess that's a close one. My mistake. Then it's 66-3, 62-7, 59-31, 63-48, 42-21, and 30-24. But Alabama's still got to come to play. You can say what you want to. We'd love to see Ole Miss get destroyed in that game, but Ole Miss is going to be able to run football. Quinshon Judkins is a guy from the state of Alabama. I expect him to come out and play hard. I do expect Alabama to win. But you start looking through this schedule here, and you start thinking, they could slip up somewhere. Could it be Texas? Could it be at A&M? Certainly could be against Tennessee. LSU's going to be a really good team too. The thing that I think about is elite as Alabama is going to be on defense, they're going to have a lot of opportunities on offense. And even though they may not be as explosive as they were with Bryce Young, they'll be good enough. Probably win a lot of games 24-10, 31-14, games like that. I just don't think a lot of teams are going to be able to score against Alabama, even though Will Anderson is gone. That's an important aspect of every bit of this. But, when you start running through this quarterback thing, it's not like they're having to get kids out of the student section and say, hey, let's go see if this thing works out for us. But Alabama, obviously, the names change. The results seldom do. And that's the thing I think probably the most important aspect of this is, it's not about players. It's about Nick Saban and the system and the process that he's put into play. And so he goes out and finds guys that fit his system and will buy into his culture, and then they go to work. Looking back at last year's numbers, and again, all this is skewed, right? Because Bryce Young was there, an experienced guy that's now a very wealthy young man. But they scored 41 points a game last year. They allowed 18. Let that sink in for a second. Now, of course, those non-conference games, with the exception of Texas, they didn't give up anything. But 18 points, that'll win you a lot of ball games. But this year, if you're not averaging 41, there's a chance those games are a lot more competitive. They ran last year for 2,544 yards. I think that's going to go up this year. I do, and some of that too was Bryce, but I think they're going to run a lot more with the running backs. I think you have to. Your tight ends are always a big thing in that scheme too, because they like to get downhill on you, and then next thing you know, you're overplaying the end, and he'll slip out there in the flat. Next thing you know, it's a 15, 20-yard game. Total offense last year, kind of looking at the the numbers here, 6,204 yards. Will they be that explosive this year? I don't think so, but I don't think they have to be. I think this is a team that's going to be very, very tough to score on, and a team that can control the clock on you and really kind of shorten the game on you and just kind of physically pound you out there. But defensively, they got some dudes back. They had a handful of guys make the All-SEC team, and some of that's just on reputation. Some of it's very much on reputation. And I think that's an important aspect of this too. When you recruit at the level they do, you don't ever really have the end of a talent cycle like maybe you do at Mississippi State or Ole Miss. You just don't have that. Of course, Ole Miss has kind of done some things to try to combat that with the portal. And as Lane Kiffin himself said, it's difficult to build a culture that way. It is. And I think most of us saw it that way. And I think they're kind of coming around to that. But when you look at the fact that, Alabama's got some guys, it feels like they've been there forever. Linebacker depth should be good. A tremendous amount of, returning talent, because all those guys on the two deep are really on defense are good enough to play on the first team, somewhere else. I think that's an important aspect of this. I understand the cupboard is always full at Alabama. Former Columbia High School state champion defensive tackle Jaheim Otis is a guy that played last year as a true freshman and had 29 tackles. He's a guy now who's an all SEC guy preseason. So Should be a good year for Alabama. Of course, I picked them to win the West and go on to Atlanta, and many of you do as well. LSU, a lot of votes, though. So, again, I picked the game of the year this year as Alabama and LSU in Tuscaloosa. I think that game could decide probably who goes to the playoff. I mean, when you get down to it, because whoever wins that game is probably going to win the West, unless LSU stumbles along the way. And, again, we talk about this every year. The teams with the experienced quarterbacks tend to win. And LSU's got Jaden Daniels. What will happen no matter who you pick as a quarterback in that big ball game? Can you get that guy up for that big moment? Because everybody knows, whether it's Jalen Milroe or Ty Simpson or the kid transferred in from Notre Dame, everybody, and that's Tommy Rees' guy. Everybody understands the implications of that ball game. Jaden Daniels has played in that ball game, and so it's going to be a very interesting game. And it's on the road in Tuscaloosa. That's an important thing to understand, too. A lot of these games for Alabama you look at and say, hey, that might be a tougher ball game. Those games are in Tuscaloosa, with the exception of the trip out to A&M. But everything else is in your home ballpark. So you feel really good because, again, the Iron Bowl, LSU, Tennessee, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Texas, all of those games are in Tuscaloosa. So the games you're most likely to make a mistake in are going to be at home. And it's so tough to play over there. It just is. Because you're not just battling the team and one of the most talented teams in the country every single year. You got to contend with the ghosts of Bear Bryant and the tradition over there and that crowd that is absolutely, relentless. It's not like Tiger Stadium. Don't get me wrong. I think Tiger Stadium is the most imposing home field advantage in the SEC, if not the country. The fans are right there on top of you. Everybody's involved in the ball game. Chances are they've had a little sip of bourbon or whatever. That is the best home field advantage in the Southeastern Conference, bar none. Alabama is a little bit sterilized compared to that. But the reality of it is, when you go over there to play, you got to usually be maybe 2 touchdowns better. It's just kind of how it is. You understand that. And that's not, take the officials out of it, right? Alabama doesn't make mistakes, and when they do, you got to make them pay for it, and that's so difficult to do. So difficult to do. So again, I pick them first. I think they're going to have a great year. And again, the only thing that even gives me any pause right now, you can say, hey, they could win the SEC. I don't think they beat Georgia. And you say, well, Steve, Georgia doesn't have an incumbent starter either. That's true. But Georgia also has the benefit of playing back-to-back national championship games and winning them. And I think Kirby Smart, again, has recruited at the same level as Alabama, so they'll be able to match up. And I think on a neutral field, I think Georgia gets them. I think Georgia has some players that can stress those Alabama linebackers that are going to be really, really good. It's going to be really interesting to see. And, of course, there's a lot of football to be played between now and then. But, what happens under center at Alabama may determine if they make the playoff or not. And you got to think, if they win the West, they'll be in the expanded playoff. But you begin to think about all that. You got a quarterback, and if you don't get that settled and have him playing at a high level fairly early in the season, you might drop a game you shouldn't. Then all of a sudden you lose that game to LSU or Tennessee, and say you limp into Atlanta with 2 losses and you get smacked by Georgia, well, then you're not a playoff. It's just there's so much to it. There's so much riding on that quarterback battle. But again, you just really need a game manager, right? You don't need a Bryce Young or a Tua. You need somebody to go out there and just kind of manage a game that turn the football over. And with that offensive line, that defense, and the way they can run the football, you don't have to go out there and win with style points. You just got to go out there and win, because the Alabama mystique sometimes is enough. All right, before we get out of here, let me update you on what I know about the baseball portal stuff. I told you guys last week we didn't expect a decision over the weekend. We didn't get one. I do think we'll get a decision from Luke Holman this week. I think Braden Montgomery may go in the next week. Maybe. We'll see. I know that there was some interaction with Braden Montgomery late last week with Mississippi State. Not sure about when a visit will take place. But we do feel good about where State stands with Braden Montgomery. It's not over. Still work to do. but I wouldn't trade spots with anybody else. Now, the Luke Holman thing, from what I'm hearing, you never want to count anybody out, but nobody is really talking Tennessee with him. And for some of the reasons we discussed last week. It's like, he's got 1 year to get this thing right, to be able to go to a place like Duty Noble Field or Alex Box Stadium, where there's a ton of tradition. The facilities are already up and running. There's not all this, hey, we're going to do this, and it's all going to happen after you leave stuff. But it's going to be a state LSU thing, barring a surprise. And I've talked to multiple people today, and that's kind of where it is. And at this point, nobody seems to know. Everybody is expecting a decision this week between those two teams. Now, he could surprise us, but it would be a surprise if it wasn't State or LSU. So we'll see how things progress. I feel okay about it. I don't feel nearly as confident as I do about Braden. I think Braden is a Mississippi State lean. I really think it's 50-50 between State and LSU. And a lot of people, I hate getting the last visit. That matters more with high school kids. I mean, guys that are old enough to buy beer, and that sometimes may be a bad metaphor, but they're not going to make the emotional decision. They're not going to get caught up in the moment, perhaps, like a high school kid is. And this is a guy that, he is going to be signing a big check this time next year. And so it's about what's best for me this season. What enables me to put myself in a situation to get drafted as high as possible next year. And that's what he's got to figure out. He's met with Nate Yeske. He's met with Justin Parker. He has an ongoing relationship with them. And he's just basically got to decide what's the best opportunity for me. And one thing that I continue to hear is, he's kind of a small-town kid. He's a guy with kind of blue-collar, hard-nosed values, and a guy that is not going to go – he's not going to pick LSU because of Mardi Gras, right? If he picks LSU, it's going to be because of Nate Yeske, and he believes that's the best thing, right? There's some other people that would pick LSU for Mardi Gras. I mean, they would. They want to go, hey, I'm going to go, laissez le bon temps rouler, right? That's what they want to do. Luke Holman's not that kid. And he may pick Mississippi State because, hey, you know what? This is more like what I'm used to. So that's an important aspect of it. But again, no update other than the fact that things are as we left them last week, but we do expect Luke Holman to announce a decision this week. It might push into the first of next week, but I think it's probably going to happen this week. Again, ultimately it's his and his family's decision, and they have not given a firm timeline. And I think, honestly, we talk about getting the bump from the visit, and maybe the longer it goes between him and that LSU visit, the better. And a lot of people are like, I hate that, the whole Auburn thing. I kind of like some other people are involved. I do. I think it gives them more to think about. But if Mississippi State gets him, that's huge. Obviously, that changes a lot for us. But there are a lot of people, too, and I want to be fair to Luke Holman. He's not Paul Skeens. Nobody is Paul Skeens. And a lot of people are saying, hey, he's the Paul Skeens this year. That's not true. That's not accurate. That's not fair to the kid. He is a true Friday night starter in the Southeastern Conference, and we need one. But to suggest that this is Paul Skeens, and even if he comes to Mississippi State, he's not going to be Paul Skeens. If he goes to LSU, he's not going to be Paul Skeens. And it's not fair to expect that of him. But if he comes in here at Mississippi State as the Friday night guy, and all of a sudden you can move Carson to Saturday, and then you've got some options on the weekend. But the reality of it is, I think people need to understand there is no Paul Skeens in the portal this year, and there may never be again. But there's not that guy, and it's unfair that so many people have kind of bestowed all this on Luke Holman and said, "Oh, you got to get him, you got to get him, you got to get him." We absolutely need him. There's no doubt about that. But to think that, hey, if he didn't go here and he goes to LSU, it's going to be like Paul Skeens 2.0, it's not. The guy that coached him is not there, and the kid himself is not there. And to Paul Skeens is a generational talent. I'm not in any way trying to excuse any of that. We absolutely need this kid. Make a big difference for us. You think about, well, I think we're going to be a good team right now. But all of a sudden you add Luke Holman to the mix. You add Braden Montgomery. I think you go from being a pretty good team to potentially being an elite team. That's a big. That's how important these next couple of weeks are. It's that big. It may be the difference in hosting and not. It may be the difference in going to Omaha and not. Are we going to be improved next year? I absolutely expect to be. But how improved kind of depends on what's going to happen here in the next 7 or 10 days. Again, if you hadn't done so, go to dogpilethebook.com. All those URLs go to the same place. Dogpile the Book and whenthebottomfalls.com. They all go to the same place. Pre-order the new book and maybe supplement the rest of your collection. If you don't have all my books, you can pick up all of them except for Bloomsville Leander there. You can get that at Amazon.com before it goes out of print. And looking for Stark Villains gear, get it at StarkVillains.com. Until next time, let's all live our lives in a way we make more friends and enemies, and people can see a difference in the way we live.